Hello. So let's start our meeting, BRICS Challenge and Opportunities. This is the first international meeting of the FGV Growth and Development Center. We're very happy. Well, the center was fostered to do research and growth. The center was created to foster research and growth and developments. And among many questions, we want to study, we want to understand the reasons some countries are richer, some countries are left behind. We want to understand growth miracles, what can be learned from this experience, and what should you do not to be one of the growth disasters. So this is a very delicate moment for the Brazilian economy. We most probably will have a negative growth of 1.5% of GDP this year, and most probably another negative growth next year. So it's very understandable for us in Brazil to use a comparative dimension to better understand possible paths ahead and the necessary policies for growth. So I think the BRICS recent experience could give us hints and suggestions of what to do or what not to do, and so that Brazil can grow fast, so many of the bottlenecks and obstacles to our development. So the BRICS topics for us, the relationship among these countries is kind of an important topic, maybe not too hot in economics. It's very, like most debated in diplomatic and political scientists than economics, but I think the relationship among these countries tend to grow. We can think of the recent visit of the Prime Minister of China to Brazil, the new BRICS banks, so we have attendance. I think that the path ahead is one of most increasing integration among this country. So we're very happy with this meeting. I think it's an important meeting for us, and we hope that we learn from the experience of China and India and other countries. I think we have a very high quality of scholars that joined our conference. I think many of them are associated many of them are research associated to the center. And the center want to be an international center. So this is a very important step in this direction. So I want to welcome everybody for this 2 days of conference. I want to once again thank all the researchers to accept our invitation. I also want to thank the support, a very strong support from Fundação, the presidents of the Fundação Getúlio Vargas, and also from the School of Graduate Studies in Economics, FGV, which I belong. So thank you very much and welcome everybody to our meeting. And now I have just one announcement. Carlos Ivan, the president of Fundação Getúlio Vargas, is kind of recovering for pneumonia and a flu, and he asked instead of join the very long session we have today, the end of the second session, he will talk briefly for 10 or 15 minutes now. So we change a little bit the order of our first day of the seminar. So I would like now to ask Rubens Cisne, the director of PGR, the Graduate School of Economics, to say some words.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Pedro. I'd like to congratulate our president of this foundation for envisaging some time ago the importance of the theme of growth and development, and also the organizers of the Growth and Development Center, João Vitor Isler, Pedro Cavalcante, and Roberto Castelo Branco. And on behalf of our Graduate School of Economics, I'd like to thank you all for sharing your knowledge and some of you having come from so far away to share these moments and your thoughts with us. I'd like to make just one short provocation for the debates which are going to follow afterwards, which concerns the political and economic situation of Brazil. Just a particular point that in the last century, it has been very usual that we have had some currency crisis determined by fiscal lenience and a regime of fixed exchange rates. So that happened in 31 and up to 2008, the last case being the case of Russia in Asia in 2007. And one thing that I think it's important to debate today and tomorrow is about what happens when you have fiscal lenience in the presence of flexible exchange rates. In this case, instead of having an abrupt change of regime at the end of the reserves of the central bank, which guarantee the exchange rate, what you may have, and I think that we have been facing in the last 8 or 10 years, is a situation in which you have to control inflation by making available around $80 billion of goods and services, which correspond to our current account deficit. So the system is very easy to understand. You raise interest rates to overvalue the exchange rate, and this way you provide this goods and services from abroad, which you pay by issuing a paper to be paid in the future. The bad thing about that is that productivity decreases very much, since it's exactly in the export area where the higher degrees, the higher advancements of productivity are achieved. And at the same time, you decrease investments because you have to increase interest rates, and then you overvalue the exchange rate, and then you have this regime which is very different from the one when the exchange rate was fixed, because now it's not like a stroke, it's more like a hepatitis or something like this, in which you little by little you have deficiency in increasing productivity. So I think that anything that any study of Brazilian growth, as Pedro has mentioned, which is right now facing some difficulties, has to deal with this case of fiscal lenience in the presence of flexible exchange rates, and having to increase interest rates, and by this means overvaluing the exchange rate to put all these goods and services here to face the excess demand. So this is the only message that I'd like to transfer to the future panelists. And thank you once more, and congratulations for the Center of Growth and Development.
Good afternoon to everyone. First of all, I have to excuse myself, but my voice is simply horrible today. Well, this acronym, BRICS, was invented by a guy at Goldman Sachs that wanted to sell the ideas that you could buy stocks on new markets. So basically Brazil, Russia, India, China, and then they added South Africa. Brazil has a GDP of between $2 and $2.5 trillion, depends on the way you measure it. Russia is between 1.5 and 2. You do remember that the Soviet Union used to compete in terms of GDP with the United States in the beginning of the 60s, but that was a long time ago. You have India, which has a GDP between 2.2 and $3.2 trillion, also depending on how you measure it. And you have China, which clearly, with somewhere between 5.5 and 7.5, ranks on another group. I won't speak about South Africa because South Africa has less than $1 trillion. Of these 5 countries, 3 are nuclear powers. 1 is definitely still a nuclear superpower, the ex-Soviet Union, Russia. It has a capacity, as they vowed themselves, to destroy the US 20 times. They recognize that there is a certain level of decadence on that because they used to be capable of doing that 50 times. Now it's only 20. And you have China, which has been very careful in increasing its capacity regarding ICBMs. Of course, on the other side, what do you have? You have all the structure that was built at the end of the Second World War and then slightly changed inside Europe by the Germans. In the other side, you have the United States and the European Union and Japan. So, what is the reality right now, my point of view? You have a stark competition in the world, and that starts with a relative fall of innovation, especially between Europe and Asia, and then also between the US and Asia. But first and foremost, the data of European central banks show that Europeans, although they still have a lot of technology, they haven't been introducing technology as fast, new technology, new innovation as fast as they need. And Asia has. There are reasons for that. Figure out that in China, taxation accounts for around 15% of GDP. In Europe, it accounts for 45%. Where do the Europeans spend the money? On their Medicare, Medicaid, pensions, and analogs to that. Of course, they are taxing companies. Companies have no innovation, because innovation depends on money, have less innovation. And they have to compete in a world where there is a guy that is investing a lot of money. If I work with stereotypes, if you need to buy commodities and you have to exchange innovation for that, your standard of living is going to fall if access to innovation can be provided by other parts of the world. So you see Southeast Asia, China, booming, and you see many problems in Europe. Well, but it's quite obvious that there is a worldwide competition that is building up between China and the US. And China is going to leverage on Europe partially to face the US. So let me examine what are the characteristics of both groups. First of all, the US also suffers a little bit from the Athenian syndrome. The Athenian syndrome was that syndrome that was developed in Athens and at the end of the 5th century before Christ. Pericles had won every war. They had won the wars against the Persians. They have built the Delos League. They control the oceans and so forth. And they decided to embellish their city. The Parthenon comes out of that. They invested a lot, and people got accustomed to social policies. After the initial flow of money, they had to continue to spend money in social policies. Well, all of Attica was kept united, supplying Athens, because there was money being paid to them. At a given moment, the situation was so difficult that they brought the treasure from Delos to Athens. And of course, they spent it. Every year, they would vote at the Agora between the social policies and the maintenance of a fleet. The fleet was a major asset that sustained their empire. And believe me, every year they voted for social policies because a little deterioration in the fleet wasn't so dangerous after all. At a given moment, they were brought to that difficult situation where you had to choose. Let us make something bold to recover our finances. Let us invade Syracuse, a Greek city in Sicily. Let us conquer that. It won't be too difficult to manage after all. And we will recover our finances. They failed twice. Their fleet became useless. Of course, the islands of their empire rebelled. Taxes stopped being paid. Attica rebelled, and Sparta attacked, seeing that Athens was weak. This has repeated itself in history in other different situations many times. No matter if it is a democracy with vote or not, the situation is always the same. The demands of a population entail public finance decisions that sometimes show, or most of the time show, that you have a contradiction between short-termism and long-term. So, what are we seeing now? We are seeing that for the first time in 70 years, the US has reduced its presence in Europe. The Eighth Army is not in Germany anymore. I don't know what will happen, but the last time it wasn't so good. We see the Ukrainian situation, and we don't correlate the two things. We see Merkel expelling the boss of the CIA in Berlin, and we don't correlate the two things. But the fact is, public finance choices are being made, and they have military and geopolitical implications. And this is going to determine. On the other hand, US diplomacy has been inspired by George Kennan, and George Kennan wrote something called A Long Telegram. And many people still think that they can contain China, many people in the US, the same way they contained the Soviet Union, forgetting that the Soviet system and the capitalist system of the 50s, they didn't interact at all. And nowadays, you have a huge interaction, which means that containment may not be possible, or it may be of a very different nature. So what we have now is a game being built, a game being developed, where on one side you have China, and the other side you have the US. They have common interests where they agree, and they have points of view on certain subjects that they don't agree. TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that has to be viewed in that framework. Does it affect the BRIC world? Of course it affects the BRIC world. In South America, we are divided, left and right. Left towards the Pacific Ocean, right towards the Atlantic. The countries in the Pacific Ocean, they will want TPP. The countries on the Atlantic, mostly Brazil, they hate TPP. So all of this is moving around, and I don't see right now a fully developed strategy on the part of the US, on the part of the European Union, or on the part of Japan to cope with this scale up of China in the world market. I'm speaking about China, not about the BRICS. China has been put inside the BRICS, but it's a different thing. How does my country situate itself in that discussion? Mostly, we ignore it. We try to pretend that we live in the planet Mars. The last time we were threatened was 75 years ago, when there was a battle between heavy cruisers 1,500 nautical miles from Rio, the Graf Spee and the Exeter, and a couple of other British ships. They fought a horrible battle. If a Graf Spee had won, and of course it didn't, it could have come to Rio in 3 or 4 days, and the city would be defenseless. Of course, we all know that the Graf Spee lost, and that later on it was sunk at in Montevideo. But imagine what will happen if ever the Indian Ocean becomes more prolific of other navies other than the American Navy. The South Atlantic may become frontier land. And we will discover that our mercantilistic twist towards China has a basic underlying assumption, which is that our boats, or their boats, have to go from Santos or another port in Brazil to Shanghai or Guangzhou, etc., without any interference. So, the question of BRICS. The 3 countries, those 3 countries, Russia, India, and China, they have a tradition which is centered around the stories of Rudyard Kipling, the Khyber Pass, and etc., which is a domination of Eurasia. And all of them are nuclear powers, for no other reason perhaps than that. Brazil sits on a different league. We live in a part of the world that hasn't had a war for 140 years. Like Australia, that had a war 70 years ago, but wasn't really invaded. Borneo was invaded, but not Australia. And we tend to think that we are in Mars. So, I just state 3 points. Economically, what do the BRICS mean? The BRICS mean for China an exceptional way, an exceptional instrument to have an alternative, non-Anglo-Saxon controlled international policy. What does it mean for Brazil? It means an opportunity to sell more and raise its price in a negotiation with the United States. This economically. What does it mean geopolitically? In the long term, it's not the BRICS, it's the whole situation of the world. We will all become less safe. And possibly Brazil will awake one day and see that it's not as safe as it thought it was. In terms of other flows of technology, etc., etc. Great partner for Brazil still the biggest partner, and will still be for a long time, will still be Europe. Europeans have a clout on Brazilian markets through the multinationals and through their investments that goes back to 100 years. We will possibly have to open to immigration. This immigration will very difficultly come from Russia or India. Perhaps some will come from China, but most of this immigration will have to come from Europe or the rest of South America. So, I leave you with a simple thought. Let us not disregard. The BRICS are an interesting construction. Yes. The idea is interesting. It goes beyond, much beyond what Jim O'Neill said. But inside the BRICS, there is a BRIC, the BRICS, and there is a C. And the strategic interests of a C are different from the strategic interests of a rest. So, Brazil was my point of view, and I am not afraid to say it. Brazil has many, many reasons why not to agree with the US in many issues. But there is one basic issue where we should be very, very attentive, and we should have the same point of view. What is that issue? It's very simple. From top to bottom, the Americas have 43 million square kilometers. It has less than 1.2 billion people. There is no other part of the world, except Africa, that has so many natural resources per capita. China has 9 million square kilometers. Half of that is a desert. India has 40% of the Brazilian territory. So what we are really talking about in terms of geopolitics, long-term geopolitics, is either we believe that international trade is going to solve everything, or we don't believe that, and competition will increase for natural resources in a way that, well, the model that you have in the Americas of freedom, democracy, individualism is something that we value. Brazil may not agree with the US in many things, but if Eurasia ever gets a dominant power, the freedom in America is finished. So this is a basic point. So we may fool around, we may do a lot of trade, we may do a lot of commerce, but at the end we have to be very conscious of that Brazil comes from a Western tradition. Remember that in the Western world, to save your soul, no matter if you believe that you have a soul or not, it's a private business between you and your God. And that is the root of individualism. That is what we are. So, if you believe in freedom, you believe in democracy, with all its flaws, and Brazilian democracy has many flaws. There is a country here in the BRICS that is completely different from the others. It is Brazil. We are a democracy on the make. We still have a lot to go. And we should not abdicate from our rights to be a democracy and not sell these rights to be a democracy. So my point of view is it's a wonderful discussion, development, etc., but that let us not forget that no matter how you increase your productivity, no matter what type of physical comfort you have, this is nothing without certain basic rights. And the first one is to be capable of saying and being in disagreement with your government. Anytime that you want, have freedom of speech and so forth. So, I end my participation here. My voice is almost finished. We will surely discuss how Asians have increased the marginal productivity of labor. Wonderful. We will surely discuss natural resources of Russia and how can that be used. Some models can be used in Brazil. What can be done, what we can learn from other countries. But let us not forget our history. It's a very long, it's a history that is different from the US. We don't want to copy the US. We don't want to copy anyone, but we are not forbidden to learn with other people's mistakes and other people's what they did right too. So, let us not be fascinated. It's good to have a BRICS bank. Yes, we have to be in China. We have to talk to the Chinese. We have to do business with them. We have to attract them. We have to accept Chinese immigration. But our way of life must not be changed. Thank you. Eu vou deixar vocês, tá?